Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday. It's January 24th, and I know we haven't done one of these in a while, so I just want to say hello, welcome back. Maybe welcome back to me. It's been a pretty crazy few days here. I know a lot of the questions coming back over the last couple of videos is what do I do? So we've had a number of new subscribers come into the family, and so I'll say again, welcome to the new folks, and welcome back to the morning session for those that have gotten used to it. So a couple of events have occurred in my life, and I've chosen to put gaps between when they happened and when I talk about them on the video. One of them was when the Trackhawk got hit, when that lady backed into me and we kind of had to lose the Trackhawk for a week. It was something I waited till we were pretty far into the solution before I put it on, before I chose to talk about it. And then with the government shutdown occurring last Friday night, really not talking about it much until today after the solution is in place, at least for the next 20 days. And that's on purpose. I don't really want to put too much emotion or too much knee-jerk reaction into these videos. And so, I choose to put a gap between the situation and when I talk about it. And the Trackhawk's back. It's fixed. It looks beautiful. You saw it last night's video. I was able to get it cleaned up after all the winter driving. She looks beautiful. And so the story ends with, there wasn't much of a story. And with the government shutdown, I have over 300 people who are deployed into the government agencies, and it had the potential, that one event, that one lack of activity by the government on Friday night had the potential to turn my entire company off like a light switch. And now we've been at it 24 years, and so I've been through 3 or 4 shutdowns. So it really doesn't solicit a lot of emotion on the business side. It certainly does on my personal beliefs and what's going on with the leadership of this country, regardless of administration or who owns Congress. But I can put that behind me a little bit. We can talk a little bit about this gap between it occurring Friday night and then working through it Monday, and then Monday afternoon it becoming kind of solved, at least for 20 days. And so what I want to talk about today is this concept called the gap. And some of you have been asking me what books I read, and I'll do a series of books for you, so you can, if you want to follow my reading over the years, we can do that. I believe it is critically important, at least for me, to read broadly and widely, deeply into a bunch of different subjects. And so I've done that over the last 5 or 10 years. The book I would have you start with, if you really want to start, is Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So it's just called 7 Habits. And I know many people have said to me, oh, I read that in college, or I've read that, or we had to read that in high school. And if those are your answers, I would say you haven't read it. And so the other thing I tell my folks is, if a seed falls on rock, it's not going to grow very well. And so if you read that book as because you were made to, or because it was for class, that seed didn't fall on very fertile soil. But if you're ready for a life change, if you're ready for a career change, if you're ready for, just some sort of life-changing behavior on your part, I would ask you to go back and read that book. So Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It was one of the deflection points in my life, and I continue to reference it. I would also ask you to ponder putting it on, buy it like through Audible or something, because we read one way, we hear another way, and to get that kind of material into your brain a couple of different ways made a difference for me. I actually listened to it back and forth from work for quite a while. I've probably listened to it 10 times over the years. I feel like it's actually inside of me and part of me now. But that book led me to a key concept for today, and that's this gap. And this gap came through Stephen Covey's book, but it was created by a man named Viktor Frankl. And he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning when he was a prisoner in the Nazi World War II work camps. And Victor's book is a little drier and a little bit more psychological, but he's the one who created this idea of a gap, and the gap is between. So the formal thing you'll read about is this gap between stimulus and response. Oh my God, could that sound more boring? But what it means and what I've come to apply it is most of the time we are emotional creatures as human beings. And so when something happens to us, we want to react in the moment. If somebody walks up to us and hits us, we immediately get into a defensive stance and want to hit them back. You know, and hopefully you don't live in a lifestyle that actually happens to you. But are you in a position where you are immediately responding? If somebody emails you and it makes you mad, are you immediately going back at them? If somebody says something that offends you in a meeting or at home, or are you immediately going back at them? You know, that's a behavior pattern of a reptile, to be honest with you. And that's because we're using our lower brain functions to decide how we respond to the world around us, and that is damn dangerous. And that's one of the first changes that we need to make if we want to kind of move towards effectiveness, wealth, job creation, company creation. We have to move away from this immediate response to what happens to us. And so Victor and then Stephen came up with this concept of, can we create a gap between what happens to us in a moment and how we respond to it? And that we define who we are as a person inside of that gap. And boy, that struck home with me. I was a reptile for years. I would respond immediately. If you were an asshole and you needed to be told you were an asshole, I was your man. I mean, I would come right at you. And you know, I'm still pretty aggressive, and I'm still pretty hard on things. But I actually allow gaps, and I've shown you two on this channel with the Trackhawk accident and then the government shutdown. And I really try to live my life in thinking through the response. So when something happens to me or my company or to those around me in that my life enterprise, I really want to sit and think about it. How do I want to respond? And I got to tell you, many times, no response has ended up being the best response. So I want to put that out there as a concept, this concept of the gap. And it is hard. It takes emotional workouts. It's something we have to practice literally 100 times a day. And you're going to blow it. You're going to miss 100 out of 100. And then tomorrow you might get one. One might stick and you go, wait a minute, that's what Dave was talking about. I'm not going to yell back. I'm not going to respond to this in the moment. And then on Friday, maybe you'll get it 2 or 3 times. And in a week, maybe you'll get it 20 times. And over the course of a year, you get good at it. And so you'll think through, how should you respond? What is the end goal of this situation, and how does my response work towards that versus this unthought out emotional lashback? So the second part, I took that a step further, and I believe that most of the time when people are emotional or angry, if that's what we're getting from somebody, it's because they're living in what I call the gap. And that is this gap between what someone wants in life versus how they're behaving. Are they working towards that? Or are they living in this gap, this chasm between what they want and what they're willing to do? And the way that affects me here at work, and the way I think it affects some of the questions you guys have been asking me is there a gap between what somebody believes they're worth and what they're actually worth in your company? And somebody asked me, how do we react when that gap exists, when somebody believes there's just such a disconnect with what they're really worth and what they're producing versus what they think they are? And I think what ends up happening is that there's an emotional attachment to, I think I'm worth this, but with no understanding of how they came up with that. And so they just have this emotional attachment to a number or a value, but they're not behaving or working their way towards that value. And sometimes people know that, and they're just not willing to close the gap. And sometimes they don't even realize that they're behaving at one level and expecting a totally different number. And you know, you've heard it for years, right? What is it? Champagne dreams and a beer budget kind of thing. And that can be applied to how we behave. I have champagne beliefs in what I'm worth, but I have a beer budget towards what I'm actually willing to do. And we've talked a little bit about, if you remember some of the older videos, that, you know, even here at DHA, I've got people who worked with me for years who wanted that $100,000 salary, but was performing at the $60,000 or $70,000 range. And when we said, hey, we got to put a plan in place to get you to 100, they end up punching out. They either leave my company or they step back and say, I'm not willing to do it. But at that point, you've created a situation where you know what they want, you create a plan to get them there, and then they self-eject or they self-realize, I'm not willing to do that much work. I'm not willing to work at that level. And so the gap is now closed. It's either closed by them leaving to find another opportunity, or it's closed by them to realize, I've got to reduce my desires. I have to reduce my own beliefs in what I'm worth because I'm in fact operating at that level. And I found that very few people have more than one of three responses. Leave because they're angry that you had this conversation with them. They reduce their wants because they realize they're not willing to perform at that level. Or they actually start working towards that higher level goal. But either way, the gap has to close, and there's only two ways. Remove the gap by leaving, remove the gap by reducing your desires, or remove the gap by increasing your productivity. And if you're looking for a conflict-free environment, I think you're dreaming. So if you have an employer or somebody with you who's living in that gap and is angry and emotional about it, and you're hoping to resolve it with no conflict, you know, I think you're in for a rough road. And to be a leader, to create, you have to face a lot of adversity. And we've talked a little bit about being comfortable performing in that area of adversity. And this is just another example. So I just go back over it real quick. I'd read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you want to dig a little deeper, read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Really understand the concept of this gap about how you personalize it. This is not some theoretical, some smushy, mushy thing, okay? This is, are you going to decide to change how you think about what the world hands you and how you respond to it? And are you willing to continually increase that gap so it goes from 1 second to 10 to a minute to an hour to a day to a week to never? I mean, can you do that? Can you put that time gap between what happens to you and how you respond to it? And are you willing to accept the concept of you are defining how the world thinks of you? You are defining how you are projecting yourself into the world by how you respond, by how you decide in that gap to behave. And then the last part is, can you convert that to help others to understand there's a gap between what they want in life, what they're looking for in life, what they value themselves at, and their behavior, their delivery, their production. And in an unemotional way, can you help them define what they really want, where they really are, and are they willing to do what's necessary to close the gap? So in one instance, the gap needs to get larger, right? How we behave, how we define ourselves, how we respond. That gap needs to get larger and larger. And there's another gap that's got to get closed. Even if it's in you, you've got to close it. Do you know what you're worth and why? And do you know what you're performing at and how you know that? And do you know how you're going to close that gap? And then as you become a leader, can you help others do that? That's really it. Gosh, you guys, we're coming up on 15 minutes. That is long enough. Again, I love these videos. Sorry for gapping it for a few days, but just the real world got a hold of me, and it was more important to take care of the company. And it gave me an opportunity to do some car videos and catch up, you know, on the street speed side of this thing. So everybody have a great Wednesday. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being so active. And we will talk to you later. Bye.